Under the sharp glow of New York City lights, the air that night carried a peculiar electricity, something between glamour and unease. The kind that lingers when two worlds collide, one built on royal etiquette and reputation, the other forged in artistry and raw authenticity. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. On the surface, it looked like a simple dinner, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry meeting pop megastar Ed Sheeran for what insiders described as a casual evening among friends. But nothing involving Meghan Markle ever remains casual for long. By sunrise, the internet would be ablaze with one headline: Ed Sheeran trashes Meghan Markle's flowers after she asked for a photo op following their dinner. The moment that should have been a friendly get-together turned into another PR nightmare. One that revealed far more than either side intended. It began quietly, as most public scandals do. Around 8 p.m., black cars lined the curb outside a discreet Manhattan restaurant favored by A-list celebrities and political elites. A handful of photographers, tipped off hours in advance, waited across the street. They didn't know exactly what they'd see, only that a royal couple was expected. Then, just after 8:10, Meghan and Harry stepped out. She in a cream coat, perfectly tailored, her smile radiant yet rehearsed. He in a dark blazer, trying to appear relaxed but failing to hide the tightness around his mouth. Minutes later, Ed Sheeran arrived, dressed in his usual understated style, jeans, jacket, and that unpretentious posture that has long set him apart from the glittering world of celebrity excess. Those who saw them enter describe an immediate contrast. Meghan and Harry moved like people aware that all eyes were on them, every gesture calculated, every glance part of a performance. Ed, in contrast, seemed oblivious or perhaps indifferent to the cameras. It was a quiet collision of personas. The royal who craved validation from the public, and the musician who had long stopped needing it. Inside, the room glowed softly, private enough to feel intimate but not enough to escape notice. First, everything appeared cordial. Meghan was animated, leaning forward in conversation, occasionally touching Ed's arm as she spoke. Harry smiled politely, nodding at intervals, clearly trying to bridge the energy between his wife's enthusiasm and Ed's calm detachment. Waiters moved quietly, bringing courses that went untouched as conversation filled the air. But beneath the smiles, there was an invisible tension, one that, according to an insider later, felt like watching two people perform while the third wished he was somewhere else. This wasn't Meghan's first encounter with Ed. They'd met years earlier at a charity event connected to mental health awareness, both sharing similar philanthropic interests. For Meghan, that past connection had potential. A joint photo, a mention on social media, perhaps even a collaboration could reframe her current image. An image that, despite her best efforts, had been battered by endless tabloid cycles and PR misfires. Ed, on the other hand, had little to gain from the association. His reputation was built on music and sincerity, not media games. The dinner, according to one observer, was Meghan's initiative, set up through mutual acquaintances with the subtle aim of public rehabilitation. From the start, Harry looked uneasy. He spoke little, choosing instead to sip his drink and let Meghan drive the interaction. When Ed cracked a joke about fame, something about the absurdity of everyone wanting a picture of their meal, Meghan laughed too loudly, too long. Harry's eyes flickered down. He smiled, but the kind of smile that hides more than it reveals. For a brief moment, Ed's face stiffened. The ease of small talk evaporated. What unfolded after dessert became the pivot of the night. As plates were cleared, Meghan reached into her bag and pulled out a bouquet. Fresh lilies and roses, elegantly wrapped. "For you," she said warmly. "Just a little thank you for joining us tonight." It was a gracious gesture, at least outwardly. But to Ed, who had seen how fame often dresses itself in courtesy to mask motive, the moment felt staged. Cameras were visible through the glass, faint flashes betraying that someone outside was documenting the exchange. His response was polite, but his expression hardened. He accepted the bouquet with a murmured thanks, setting it beside his chair. Then came the misstep, the request that would turn dinner into disaster. "Before you go," Meghan said, her tone light but deliberate, "we should get a photo together for charity awareness. It'll be lovely, just one picture to share positivity." Harry's head turned sharply, as though caught off guard. Ed's smile faltered. The room fell into that awkward quiet that lasts only seconds but feels like an eternity. "Maybe another time," he said finally, standing to leave. His voice was even not rude, but firm enough to end the suggestion. The look on Meghan's face, witnesses later said, changed instantly. Shock flickering into embarrassment, then irritation masked by a strained grin. She recovered quickly, rising to see him out, but her movements had lost their rhythm. Harry remained seated for a moment, staring at the table before following. Outside, cameras clicked like thunder. Meghan flashed her best smile again, looping her arm through Harry's. But Ed didn't linger. He gave a quick wave, declined the photographer's questions, and slipped into his car. The bouquet stayed behind on the restaurant's bench. By morning, the flowers were found in the trash bin just steps from the alley exit. The internet exploded within hours. "Ed Sheeran snubs Meghan Markle," read one headline. "PR dinner gone wrong," said another. Social media users debated what had really happened. Some defended Meghan, saying it was a misunderstanding. Others argued Ed's reaction spoke volumes, that he'd seen through a calculated attempt to use him for image repair. A restaurant employee added fuel by anonymously confirming the flowers were indeed discarded minutes after Ed's departure. The gesture that was meant to symbolize gratitude now stood as a symbol of rejection. As the story spread, so did speculation about Harry's reaction. Insiders close to the couple described a visible chill between them as they left the venue, their car ride silent. Meghan reportedly fumed over what she called disrespect, while Harry urged her to drop it, reminding her that not everyone wanted publicity. The contrast between them, once charmingly presented as opposites attracting, now looked like fracture lines deepening with each public outing. The next day, PR experts were quick to weigh in. One noted, "Meghan operates in a space where every gesture must serve a narrative. Ed Sheeran operates in the opposite world, where authenticity is currency." The clash was inevitable. The evening, though brief, became another reflection of the broader theme surrounding Meghan's post-royal life. The struggle to be seen as genuine while constantly maneuvering for public approval. In truth, what made the dinner so revealing wasn't Ed's refusal or the tossed bouquet. It was the humanity underneath the performance. Ed's quiet boundary, Harry's uneasy silence, Meghan's forced composure. All fragments of people caught between worlds they can't fully control. To the public, it was gossip. To those inside that restaurant, it was something far heavier. A reminder that no amount of title or fame can erase the discomfort of rejection when it unfolds in front of cameras. As night turned into dawn, Meghan's team reportedly began drafting statements to reframe the evening as a friendly dinner to discuss charitable collaboration. But the damage was already done. Images of Ed leaving alone contrasted sharply with Meghan's staged smile outside. The bouquet, lying discarded, became the visual metaphor for the entire saga. Once again, perception had overpowered intention. And so, what began as a simple dinner among high-profile figures ended as another cautionary chapter in the ongoing story of the Sussex brand. It wasn't the first time Meghan's attempts at connection had backfired, and it likely wouldn't be the last. But in that fleeting moment, when a global superstar quietly declined a photo and left a bouquet behind, something deeper unfolded. It was the soundless, public collapse of authenticity meeting ambition. The night in New York had promised connection and goodwill. Instead, it revealed fragility and facade. The glow of the city lights faded, but the echoes of that awkward dinner still ripple through conversations today. Because sometimes the loudest statement isn't made in words. It's made in silence, in a small act of rejection, and in the simple decision to leave the flowers behind. This section is complete. Would you like me to continue with the next section? The setup, dinner in the city that never sleeps? The night before the dinner felt deceptively ordinary. New York City, as usual, hummed with its restless pulse. Yellow cabs slicing through rain-slicked streets, the low thrum of jazz spilling from hidden bars, and the endless flicker of lights reflecting off the glass towers. But for a few people tucked inside a private PR suite at the Crosby Hotel, the night was anything but ordinary. They were rehearsing, not for a show, not for a performance, but for optics, for how the next evening's dinner would look, sound, and, most importantly, feel to the world. The dinner between Meghan Markle, Prince Harry, and Ed Sheeran was supposed to be simple. At least, that's how it was presented. A casual catch-up between friends. Read the internal memo drafted by Meghan's communications aide. The aim, however, was far from casual. Meghan had been in the press crossfire for weeks following another round of unflattering headlines about her alleged Hollywood snubs. Her team needed something fresh, a gesture that would reposition her image as gracious, well-connected, and respected by authentic artists. Ed Sheeran, beloved by millions and universally seen as humble, was the perfect anchor for that narrative. So the plan began quietly. Meghan's assistant reached out to Ed's management under the pretext of discussing a joint mental health initiative, something aligning with both Harry's Invictus values and Ed's past collaborations with charitable causes. Ed, ever the polite Englishman, agreed to dinner. There were no alarms, no warnings. To him, it was a chance to reconnect, have a nice meal, maybe chat about projects. To Meghan, it was an opportunity. And in her world, opportunity always came with preparation. That's why, days before the dinner, subtle groundwork was laid. A stylist ensured Meghan's wardrobe would strike the perfect balance between effortlessly elegant and approachable. The restaurant was handpicked. Not too grand to seem pretentious, but upscale enough for exclusivity. Photographers were notified through unofficial channels. Nothing direct, just quiet whispers to gossip outlets known for royal coverage. Timing, arrival order, even seating placement. All were carefully coordinated to frame Meghan and Harry at the heart of every image. Harry, sources say, was reluctant from the start. He didn't understand why every interaction had to be strategic. "It's just dinner," he reportedly told her. But for Meghan, it was never just dinner. It was a moment, one that could shift perception, create headlines, and remind the world she was still part of the A-list fabric she so desperately wanted to be woven into. Meanwhile, across town, Ed Sheeran was finishing up a studio session when the dinner reminder came through. To him, the invitation carried no ulterior motive. He admired the couple's charity work and thought catching up over dinner sounded pleasant. His wife, Cherry, even joked that he should wear something decent this time and try not to offend royalty. But Ed's world had never been about image management. Fame had taught him to stay grounded, to avoid the glittering traps of celebrity friendships built on visibility rather than sincerity. That's why, as he prepared to attend, he didn't bring a PR aide or photographer, just himself. By the next afternoon, whispers of the dinner began circulating through New York's entertainment scene. Paparazzi with insider connections traded locations in hushed tones. Meghan's team, of course, denied any involvement, but the precision of the timing later made that denial hard to believe. The restaurant itself, an exclusive but understated Manhattan spot known for privacy, had hosted everyone from movie stars to political figures. It had just the right blend of luxury and intimacy. Inside, a private room was reserved under a discreet alias. The staff were briefed not to approach the table unless called, and mobile phones were discouraged. Meghan's security detail scanned every corner before she and Harry arrived. At exactly 8:10 p.m., their car pulled up. Meghan stepped out first, composed and radiant under the city lights. Her cream-colored coat draped effortlessly, a soft contrast to the black SUV that had just delivered her. Harry followed, expression cautious but calm. Cameras flashed. Paparazzi shouted questions they ignored. They entered quickly, guided by the restaurant manager. For the next 10 minutes, the door remained shut. Then Ed Sheeran appeared. He arrived alone, stepping out of a modest vehicle, adjusting his jacket against the chill. Unlike Meghan's rehearsed entrance, his was unguarded. No entourage, no spectacle. A few photographers called his name, but he gave a small smile and a wave, then ducked inside. Inside that room, the setup was immaculate. Soft candlelight reflected off the table's crystalware. A floral centerpiece, ironically featuring lilies and roses, sat perfectly aligned. Harry took the seat nearest the door, Meghan in the middle, Ed across from her. To an outsider, it would have looked like three friends enjoying an elegant night out. But beneath that polished setting lay an unspoken hierarchy. Meghan controlled the flow, steering conversation, deciding when to laugh, when to lean in, when to gesture dramatically. Harry played the role of supportive husband, nodding along, occasionally adding polite anecdotes. Ed listened, engaged at first, but soon sensing the performance in every exchange. The restaurant staff, trained to notice subtleties, later recounted that Meghan seemed hyper-aware of every moment. When she wasn't speaking, she was glancing toward the glass partition, ensuring her angles were visible from the faint silhouettes of photographers outside. Harry, by contrast, appeared distant, preoccupied. He fiddled with his napkin, checked his watch, and occasionally scanned the room as though seeking escape. The conversation reportedly began light: music, family life, shared causes. But as dinner progressed, Meghan shifted toward collaboration talk. "You've always had such a global reach, Ed," she said, her tone bright but deliberate. "Imagine if we did something together for awareness. Mental health or veterans recovery. Something uplifting." Ed smiled politely. "That's lovely," he said, "though I've been scaling back public partnerships, trying to focus on the music again." His answer, though casual, drew a fleeting shadow across Meghan's face. In that instant, the tone of the evening subtly shifted. What had been framed as friendly began to feel transactional. Harry caught it too. His shoulders tensed, and though he kept quiet, his glance toward Meghan spoke volumes. She pressed on, pivoting topics, but Ed's restraint signaled disinterest. He wasn't there to talk strategy or branding. He was there for conversation, not promotion. Outside, the flashes intensified as news spread. Harry and Meghan dining with Ed Sheeran was already trending before dessert arrived. Paparazzi speculated about a new collaboration. Some fans cheered the idea. Others mocked it as another publicity stunt. Inside, Ed noticed the photographers, a flicker of annoyance crossing his expression. Meghan, seeing this, leaned in, trying to reassure him. "Ignore them," she said softly. "They're harmless." But for Ed, the realization that the dinner might have been orchestrated for exposure was impossible to ignore. When the final course was cleared, tension hung thick in the air. Meghan, still determined to salvage the evening, suggested one last toast. "To new beginnings," she said, lifting her glass. Ed nodded, clinking lightly, though his smile no longer reached his eyes. Outside, the restaurant's doorman discreetly informed the waiting cars to prepare for exit. Harry glanced toward the clock again. Meghan adjusted her hair in the reflection of her glass. The night was nearly over, but its real drama had only just begun. That dinner, now immortalized through countless retellings, wasn't about food or friendship. It was about perception, how three people from vastly different worlds tried and failed to find common ground. For Meghan, it was a chance to rewrite her story. For Harry, a reminder of how exhausting life under constant scrutiny had become. For Ed, it was an uncomfortable encounter with the side of fame he'd long avoided. When they finally stood to leave, the air felt heavier than when they arrived. Outside, the crowd had tripled. Cameras flashed, questions flew, and beneath the smiles and small waves, there was fatigue. Harry's jaw tightened. Meghan's grip on his arm firmed. Ed exited quietly through the side door, slipping into the cold Manhattan night. No entourage, no drama, just a man who had seen enough. The dinner's setup, though meticulously planned, would unravel spectacularly within hours. The coordination, the secrecy, the stagecraft, all undone by one simple act that no PR strategy could contain. Authenticity refusing to play along. Inside the restaurant, the first moments after the initial greetings felt deceptively smooth, like the calm before a storm that no one could quite predict but everyone subconsciously sensed. The staff discreetly poured wine, The scent of truffle pasta drifted from the kitchen, and soft jazz played in the background. Everything seemed perfect, yet there was an undercurrent, an invisible friction humming beneath the surface. Meghan spoke first, as she often did in public settings. Her voice carried that trained mixture of warmth and authority, the kind that commands attention while pretending not to seek it. "It's so good to finally catch up properly," she said, smiling at Ed. "We've been meaning to do this for ages." Ed nodded politely. "Yeah, it's been a while," he replied. His tone was gentle, but detached, the kind of response that fills silence rather than deepens connection. Harry sat slightly apart, one elbow on the table, chin resting on his hand. He looked between them like a man observing rather than participating. His smile appeared now and then, faint. "Have you ever thought about doing something with us?" Meghan asked suddenly, leaning forward. "Maybe a documentary-style project? Something about the intersection of fame and purpose." Ed hesitated. "I'm kind of taking a break from that stuff," he said. "I've been keeping my head down lately. The music's enough for me right now." The table went quiet. Harry shifted slightly, his fingers drumming lightly against the tablecloth. He'd seen this pattern before, the pitch wrapped in charm, the quiet resistance that followed. Meghan's expression didn't falter, but her tone cooled ever so slightly. "Of course," she said with a nod. "Totally understand. Just thought it could be powerful, you know? People really respond to stories of resilience." Ed smiled politely. "I'm sure they do." It was a simple exchange, but the shift in energy was undeniable. Meghan glanced at Harry, perhaps expecting him to smooth the moment, but he didn't. He stayed silent, his eyes on his plate. The stillness grew heavy again, broken only by the faint clink of glassware. A few minutes later, Meghan tried another angle. "I actually brought something for you," she said, reaching into her handbag. She pulled out a small wrapped gift, flowers, beautifully arranged, delicate and fragrant. "Just a token of appreciation," she added. Ed looked surprised. "Oh, that's kind," he said, taking them with a polite smile. "Thanks." His expression softened briefly, but there was something uneasy in his eyes. Gifts, especially in circles like these, rarely came without purpose. The photographer flashes outside had started by then. Subtle at first, like distant lightning, then more frequent. Meghan pretended not to notice, but her posture straightened. She turned her head slightly toward the window, checking her reflection in the glass's faint glare. Ed caught it. His smile vanished. "So, are those your guys out there?" he asked, half joking. Meghan blinked. "What? Oh no, not at all," she said too quickly. "They just show up sometimes." The answer didn't convince anyone. Harry stared down at his hands. Ed let out a quiet laugh, more disbelief than amusement. "Right?" he said, setting the bouquet gently aside. For the next several minutes, conversation became mechanical. Meghan's tone brightened artificially, trying to resuscitate what was already lost. She complimented Ed's latest album, spoke about how much people need positivity these days, and mentioned charity work again. Each word sounded like it was trying to outrun the awkwardness. Ed, meanwhile, leaned back, giving short, courteous responses. The tension at the table was palpable now. Harry's discomfort grew visible. He rubbed the back of his neck, adjusted his collar, and took sips of water between every few sentences. The glow in Meghan's expression hardened slightly, though she masked it with practiced calm. Finally, Ed set down his glass. "It's been great seeing you both," he said, signaling subtly that the night was over. "I should head off early morning tomorrow." Meghan blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, already?" she said. "We were just getting to the fun part." She laughed again, but it didn't land. Ed smiled faintly. "Yeah, I've got to run," he replied. He stood up, and Meghan rose immediately, moving toward him. "At least let's get a quick photo," she said. "Something to share for charity. Just a nice message for the fans." That was the breaking point. Ed's body stiffened. His expression, still polite, changed. His smile froze. "Maybe not tonight," he said, voice low but firm. Let's just keep it off the record. Meghan hesitated, her lips parting as though to protest. Harry looked between them, his face drained of expression. Sure, Meghan said finally, forcing a smile. Of course. Ed nodded once, offered a quick handshake, and turned toward the exit. The air seemed to thin around the table as he left, leaving behind a silence that stretched longer than any conversation that evening. Meghan stood frozen for a moment, then sat down slowly. She looked at the flowers on the table, the ones he hadn't taken with him. Harry's voice broke the silence. He's not one for that kind of thing, he said softly. She didn't answer. Outside, the sound of cameras clicking grew louder as Ed stepped into the street. He waved to a few fans, got into his car, and disappeared into the Manhattan night. Moments later, Meghan and Harry exited through the main door. She smiled brightly, as though nothing had happened, arm linked with Harry's. But the light in her eyes wasn't joy, it was calculation, the determination to turn even rejection into narrative control. By the time they returned to their hotel, Meghan's team was already working on statements, rewording reality before it slipped from her grasp. Inside that small private dining room, what had started as a friendly dinner had quietly become an emblem of everything fragile in Meghan and Harry's world. Charm strained by insecurity, sincerity overshadowed by image. In the end, the tension wasn't just between Meghan and Ed. It was between authenticity and performance, between those who live for the story and those who wish to escape it. The smiles that night were practiced, the laughter hollow, and the silence unbearably real. The moment the waiter cleared the final plates, a hush settled over the table, a fragile quiet that felt both polite and loaded. Outside, camera flashes pulsed faintly through the frosted glass, like lightning behind storm clouds. Inside, Meghan crossed her legs, adjusted her coat, and leaned forward, the practiced smile never leaving her face. She had one last move to make, one final gesture to salvage the evening that had slowly slipped through her fingers. Ed Sheeran sat across from her, posture relaxed but distant, his hands folded in front of him. He wasn't angry, just detached. The dinner had drifted from genuine conversation into what felt like a carefully managed performance, and he sensed it. Harry sat between them, gaze fixed on the remnants of dessert. Stirring his spoon through melted ice cream, he didn't seem to notice. Meghan broke the silence first. "It's been such a wonderful evening," she said, her voice carrying that polished enthusiasm reserved for interviews and public appearances. "We really should mark it somehow." Ed looked up, slightly puzzled. "Mark it? You know," she continued, "just a quick picture before we go. Something simple. For awareness." The words hung in the air. Awareness, Meghan's favorite term. It sounded harmless enough, almost noble, but for those who knew her pattern, it usually meant control of the narrative. Harry's head lifted slightly, his expression unreadable. Ed's smile didn't return. "A picture?" he repeated softly. "Yes," she said quickly, her tone brightening to fill the awkward pause. "Just one. For social media. We can mention it's about supporting mental health or maybe veteran initiatives. It'll send a positive message." Harry's jaw flexed. His hand tightened around his glass, knuckles whitening slightly. He didn't say a word. The silence stretched again, thin and brittle. Ed shifted in his chair. "I'd rather not, if that's okay," he said finally, his voice low but firm. "I tend to keep things like this private." The temperature in the room dropped almost imperceptibly. Meghan blinked, her expression flickering between surprise and disbelief. She recovered quickly, laughing lightly, as though he'd made a charming joke. "Oh, of course," she said, brushing her hair back. "Totally get that. I just thought it might be nice, for the cause." Ed's lips pressed into a polite half-smile. "Yeah, I'm sure. But I think it's better if it's not made into a thing." That phrase, "not made into a thing," landed like a quiet insult. For someone like Meghan, who lived by the architecture of image, not making something into a thing was the ultimate dismissal. It meant the moment didn't matter enough to be seen. Harry exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. He didn't intervene. perhaps knowing that anything he said would only make it worse. Meghan nodded, her smile tight, her posture still perfect. But behind her eyes, irritation simmered. She wasn't used to being refused, not like this, not publicly, not by someone whose influence could have helped reshape her fading media narrative. The conversation after that request grew hollow. Every sentence was shorter, every glance colder. Ed thanked them for dinner, stood, and reached for his jacket. Meghan rose as well, maintaining composure, her voice smooth but sharp at the edges. "Well, it was lovely seeing you," she said, extending her hand. Ed shook it, polite, neutral. Harry stood a second later, offering a quick nod. "Take care, mate," he said quietly. As Ed turned toward the exit, Meghan's tone softened, one last attempt to regain control. "Oh, wait, your flowers." She picked up the bouquet she'd gifted earlier, still wrapped perfectly, and held it out with both hands. Her gesture was graceful, her expression a mirror of kindness. Ed took them without enthusiasm, eyes lowering briefly. "Thanks," he said, voice barely above a murmur. He stepped toward the door, but before he reached it, something strange happened. A flicker of impulse, quiet but final. He paused by the side table near the entrance, set the bouquet down gently, and continued out. Not in anger, not as a statement, just as a choice. He didn't look back. The sound of the door closing behind him was soft, almost tender, but in that silence, the meaning was deafening. Meghan stood still, hand frozen in midair where she'd extended the flowers moments earlier. Harry glanced toward the abandoned bouquet, then at her. Neither spoke. When they finally moved to leave, Meghan pressed her lips together, composing herself again. Outside, the flashes intensified. She stepped into them with poise, the trained elegance of someone who knew how to turn every stumble into spectacle. Harry followed a few paces behind, expression blank, eyes distant. Later, eyewitnesses would recall the look on her face as she exited the restaurant. A mixture of charm and strain, a mask stretched too tight. She smiled like nothing was wrong, one said. But you could tell something was off. Her jaw was clenched the whole time. That night, the discarded bouquet became a story in itself. A restaurant worker, tidying up after closing, found it near the door, petals still perfect, wrapping untouched. He placed it in the trash, unaware that by morning, it would be the center of a headline storm. "Ed Sheeran trashes Meghan Markle's flowers," the tabloid screamed. The symbolism was too rich to ignore. Kindness offered, authenticity refused, image left to wilt. Inside their car, Harry and Meghan sat in silence. The hum of the engine filled the void between them. "He didn't mean it personally," Harry said eventually, trying to soften the blow. Meghan stared out the window, watching New York blur by in streaks of light and shadow. "Of course not," she replied, voice tight. "It's fine." But her eyes told another story, a storm of wounded pride and disbelief. She reached for her phone, already thinking of damage control. A short post, maybe something about grateful for meaningful conversations and shared commitments to doing good. It didn't matter that the evening had ended awkwardly. What mattered was what people saw. Harry closed his eyes, leaning back. The gulf between them deepened, not out of anger, but exhaustion. He had long grown tired of nights like this, where everything was curated, where genuine moments drowned under layers of strategy. The irony was painful. Meghan had asked for one picture to show the world connection and warmth, but what the world saw instead was rejection. A quiet refusal that cut deeper than public criticism ever could. Ed's gesture, simple as it was, shattered the illusion that every meeting could be spun into a narrative of virtue and visibility. In the following days, commentary flooded the internet. Some called Ed's act petty. Others praised him for setting boundaries. PR analysts dissected every angle, from his silence to the flowers' disposal. One expert summed it up bluntly. That wasn't a snub. It was a statement. Ed Sheeran didn't reject Meghan Markle, the brand. He rejected Meghan Markle, the performance. For Meghan, that subtle rejection became an echo she couldn't silence. It wasn't just about the photo or the flowers. It was about control slipping from her grasp in real time. She'd built her identity on mastering perception, on turning every slight into a story of resilience. But this time, no amount of editing, spinning, or captioning could erase the truth everyone sensed but few dared to say aloud. That authenticity cannot be staged, and validation cannot be demanded. The night ended as most of her public evenings do, with a headline. But beneath the glossy photos and recycled statements, there was a story no camera caught. A moment when silence spoke louder than applause, when a simple no became the loudest word in the room. The flowers had seemed like a simple, harmless touch, a classic Meghan Markle flourish. Beautiful, thoughtful, photogenic. A symbol of grace and gratitude, wrapped neatly in pale pink paper and tied with a silk ribbon. On the surface, it was elegance incarnate. But as with many things in Meghan's world, the gesture carried layers. Presentation, intention, and image woven so tightly together that one could no longer tell where sincerity ended and strategy began. That night in New York, the bouquet represented more than a token of thanks. It was part of a carefully choreographed narrative, an accessory to the moment. Every element had been curated. The restaurant, the wardrobe, the timing, even the tone of laughter. The flowers were the closing note, meant to send a message of warmth and connection. They were meant to be photographed, admired, remembered. What Meghan didn't expect was that they would become the single most talked about symbol of the evening, for all the wrong reasons. Inside the restaurant, after Ed Sheeran declined the photo and quietly left, the flowers sat alone on the table between two empty wine glasses. Their fragrance filled the air, a soft, floral sweetness that now felt almost mocking. Meghan stared at them in silence for several long seconds, the tension still clinging to the air like humidity before a storm. She finally exhaled, her composure cracking just slightly. "He didn't have to be rude," she said under her breath. Harry looked up from his seat, eyes weary. "He wasn't rude, Meg. He just didn't want a picture." Her jaw tightened. "You think that was normal?" she asked quietly, still staring at the bouquet. "We invite him, we talk charity, we give him a gift, and he just walks out like that?" Harry's response was calm but deliberate. "He's not into the publicity thing. He's always been that way." "That's not an excuse," she replied. Her voice wasn't angry, just wounded, sharp with disbelief. A simple photo for charity? It wasn't about publicity. It was about awareness. He made it seem like we were trying to use him. Harry didn't answer. His silence was enough of one. The waiter returned to clear the table, pausing when he noticed the flowers still sitting untouched. "Should I wrap these for you, ma'am?" he asked softly. Meghan glanced up, the mask of grace sliding back into place. "No, that's all right," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He left them." The waiter hesitated. "Would you like me to send them to your car?" Meghan's voice lowered. "No. Just leave them here." She stood up, smoothed her coat, and took Harry's arm. As they exited, she kept her smile poised for the cameras waiting outside, flashing her signature blend of charm and composure. But behind the poised expression, the sting of rejection burned. She had offered a gift meant to signal connection, and it had been left behind like an afterthought. When the restaurant closed later that night, the flowers were still there. The staff debated what to do with them. "They're too nice to toss," one said. "Maybe someone will come back for them." But no one did. By morning, they'd wilted slightly under the chill of the air conditioning, their petals losing their shine. Eventually, a busboy placed them in the trash near the service alley. A photographer passing by snapped the image, unaware that it would soon become headline material. The next morning, tabloids exploded with the story. The headlines came fast, dramatic, and merciless. Ed Sheeran tosses Meghan Markle's flowers after awkward dinner. Dinner disaster. Ed snubs Meghan's gift. Rejected by Ed, Markle's PR move backfires. Within hours, social media picked it apart frame by frame. Some users defended Meghan, calling it another example of the media twisting harmless gestures. Others sided with Ed, interpreting his decision as a quiet rebellion against being dragged into royal drama. For Meghan, The timing couldn't have been worse. The story overshadowed a charity announcement she had scheduled that same week. Every post she made on her Archwell channels was flooded with comments about the flowers. Memes spread rapidly. Photos of wilted roses captioned with phrases like, "When authenticity meets PR." One viral tweet read, "Even Ed's bouquet couldn't survive Meghan's spin cycle." Inside the Sussex's Manhattan suite, Meghan was livid. "They're twisting it," she said, pacing near the window, phone in hand. "They're making it look like I did something wrong." Harry sat on the couch, scrolling through headlines, his expression unreadable. "They're not twisting it," he said finally. "They're just reacting. You can't control that." "That's the problem," she snapped. "Every time we try to do something positive, it gets turned against us. Every single time." Harry didn't argue. He'd heard this before. The endless cycle of blame, misunderstanding, and image repair. "Maybe," he said carefully, "we don't need to do everything publicly." Meghan stopped pacing, looking at him as if he'd suggested something absurd. "That's easy for you to say," she replied. "You've never had to fight for your narrative." He looked up at her then, eyes tired but steady. "Haven't I?" The question hung between them, heavy and rhetorical. She turned away. Later that afternoon, Meghan's PR advisor arrived with damage control strategies. "We can shift the angle," the woman said briskly, setting down her laptop. Harry sighed audibly, leaning back against the chair. "Or," he muttered, "we could just let it go." Neither woman acknowledged the comment. The laptop screen glowed, displaying a drafted statement. It was carefully worded, deliberate, sterile. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex were delighted to catch up with their friend Ed Sheeran in New York last night. The evening was filled with meaningful conversation and mutual appreciation for ongoing charitable efforts. The Duchess, as always, offered a small token of thanks. Meghan read it, then nodded. "Post it." The statement went live within the hour. But instead of calming the storm, it added fuel. Commentators mocked the phrasing. Meaningful conversation and mutual appreciation became a meme in itself. The public saw the statement as another attempt at overmanagement, another example of controlling the story rather than owning it. Ed Sheeran's silence, by contrast, became his most powerful statement. He didn't confirm, deny, or comment. He didn't need to. The contrast between his stillness and Meghan's noise told the whole story. Days later, when Ed was asked by a reporter about the dinner, he smiled faintly and said, "It was nice seeing them. I wish them all the best." Nothing more. The simplicity of that line disarmed everyone. It neither fed the fire nor extinguished it. It simply existed, unbothered, untarnished. And that calmness only deepened Meghan's frustration. In private, Meghan reportedly told friends, "People love when I'm painted as desperate. They want me to be the villain." But deep down, the rejection lingered not because of the headlines, but because of what it revealed. For someone who'd built her career on the art of connection, being quietly dismissed was the deepest wound. To the public, the flowers were just a symbol, a piece of gossip to laugh about. But inside Meghan's world, they represented something far greater. The moment control slipped completely from her hands. One simple gesture had spiraled into global ridicule, and no statement could rewrite what everyone had already seen. And so the flowers, meant to charm, meant to symbolize grace and gratitude, became a metaphor for something darker. They were her mirror, perfectly arranged, beautifully presented, and ultimately disposable when the illusion broke. This section is complete. Would you like me to continue with the next section, the aftermath outside the restaurant? Outside, the crisp Manhattan air cut through the noise. The city buzzed as it always did. Honking cabs, flashing lights, the murmur of passers-by. But outside that restaurant, something heavier lingered. The crowd had thickened. Photographers lined both sides of the sidewalk, their cameras poised like weapons of light. Meghan and Harry stepped out first, hand in hand, faces glowing in the flashes. Their smiles were picture-perfect, wide enough for warmth, practiced enough for control. Yet beneath that polished exterior, something was wrong. Meghan's expression, while radiant, was rigid. It was the smile of someone refusing to break, of someone who just lost control inside, but was determined not to show it outside. Harry, walking slightly behind her, seemed withdrawn, his gaze unfocused. He offered faint waves to the crowd, but his energy was distant, the kind of body language that said he wanted to be anywhere else. The photographers shouted their usual barrage. "Meghan, this way. Meghan, what are you wearing? Harry, over here. Any word on Ed Sheeran?" That last question made her flinch ever so slightly. Just a twitch in her jaw, barely visible, but real. She recovered instantly, tilting her head toward the cameras and smiling again. But Harry noticed. He always did. Behind them, a restaurant employee quietly moved the forgotten bouquet from the table to the service counter. Through the glass, one of the paparazzi lenses caught the motion, a fleeting glimpse of pale petals against the dim interior light. A single flash captured it before the door swung shut again. In that instant, the story was already writing itself. Ed Sheeran, meanwhile, exited through a side alley, avoiding the main crowd altogether. He gave a polite nod to a few waiting fans but declined photos, murmuring a quiet "have a good night" before slipping into his car. He didn't slam the door. He didn't look back. He simply left, and that, perhaps, was what made the act so powerful. On the sidewalk, Meghan continued to pose, her posture straight and graceful, the queen of her own narrative. The lights bathed her in a harsh glow, freezing every movement, every carefully arranged gesture. She knew these pictures would circulate within minutes. Her hair, her outfit, her composure all dissected by morning. She could handle that. What she couldn't handle was what people would say once they noticed Ed wasn't there. "Is Ed still inside?" someone shouted. Another photographer called out, "Did he refuse the photo, Meghan?" She turned sharply toward the voice, eyes narrowing for half a second before softening back into a smile. "It was a wonderful evening," she said, loud enough for the cameras. "Thank you all for coming." Her driver opened the car door. She slid in first, Harry following wordlessly. As the door shut and the world outside dimmed, her expression dropped, the smile gone, the facade collapsing into something far colder. She stared ahead, the silence between her and Harry thick enough to fill the car. Harry looked out the window, jaw set. "You know they saw it," he said finally. Meghan didn't turn to him. "Saw what?" "The bouquet," he replied quietly. "Someone caught it. You can tell." She exhaled sharply, frustration flashing in her eyes. "Of course they did. They always do." Harry rubbed his forehead. "Meg, maybe?" "Don't," she interrupted. "Just don't." The car pulled away, gliding through the neon-lit streets of Lower Manhattan. Outside, the city was alive and indifferent, swallowing scandals as quickly as it created them. But for Meghan, the night refused to fade. Every camera flash replayed in her mind. Every headline she knew was already being drafted felt like an echo she couldn't silence. By the time they reached their hotel, her phone was already buzzing. Her assistant's voice came through, frantic. "TMZ's running something. They've got photos. It looks like the flowers." Meghan closed her eyes. "Of course they do," she murmured. Harry watched her, saying nothing. He had learned long ago that silence was safer than trying to reason with her when she was in crisis mode. She began pacing the suite, muttering half-sentences to herself. "They'll twist it. They'll say it was some kind of rejection, ridiculous." She stopped, turning to him suddenly. "You saw it, Harry. It was innocent. I was just being polite." "I know," he said softly. "But people will see what they want to see." That line stung more than he intended. She glared at him, voice rising. "Why do you always say that? You act like I'm doing something wrong just for trying." "I didn't say that," he replied calmly. "I'm saying we can't fight every interpretation." She looked at him for a long moment, then turned away. Her reflection in the window stared back at her. Composed, beautiful, but brittle. "Maybe I shouldn't bother at all," she said finally. "Maybe it's not worth it anymore." Harry didn't answer. He knew she didn't mean it. For Meghan, control wasn't optional. It was survival. Back outside the restaurant, the crowd had thinned, but a few photographers lingered, waiting for any scrap of aftermath. One of them spotted the staff carrying the trash to the curb. A flash went off again, just one, but enough. Within an hour, the photo surfaced online. A crumpled bouquet resting on a pile of garbage bags, petals still intact, the soft pink wrapping faintly visible under a dim streetlight. The internet did what it always did. Amplified, distorted, and dissected. Commenters debated whether Ed himself had thrown them out or if it was a misunderstanding. Conspiracy threads formed in real time. He left them, one user claimed, quoting a supposed eyewitness. He said he didn't want to take props. Another joked, even Ed Sheeran's allergic to Markle PR. The memes came next. Images of discarded roses captioned, "She loves me not." Meghan's team scrambled overnight. They issued clarifications, subtle but firm. Reports of tension at dinner are exaggerated. The Duchess and Mr. Sheeran share mutual respect and ongoing admiration for each other's charitable work. But the words rang hollow. The damage was already done, and the internet rarely waits for nuance. Harry scrolled through the coverage silently, his expression unreadable. Meghan, meanwhile, was already on calls with her PR strategist, drafting ways to reclaim the narrative. She planned to upload a carefully chosen photo the next day, something serene, elegant, far removed from controversy. "We'll post something from last week," she said. "Something neutral. People will move on." But they didn't. The image of the flowers in the trash became the story. Commentators on morning talk shows debated whether Ed's act had been deliberate or symbolic. Others questioned why Meghan continued to put herself in situations that looked engineered. And through it all, Ed remained silent. For the public, silence became the final verdict. When someone refuses to defend themselves or attack others, people assume they don't need to. Meghan's endless explanations only made her look more desperate to control a narrative that had slipped irreversibly away. The irony was almost poetic. She had come to New York seeking validation, a shared moment with a beloved musician that would remind the world she still mattered. Instead, she left with headlines painting her as manipulative and insincere. The flowers, meant as a gesture of goodwill, now symbolized rejection. That night, as Meghan scrolled through the storm of commentary, one headline caught her attention. The bouquet that spoke louder than words. She stared at it for a long time, her reflection ghosted across the screen. For the first time, she felt the weight of a truth she refused to admit. Sometimes silence isn't ignorance. It's a boundary. She placed her phone down, exhaled, and turned toward Harry. He was half asleep on the couch, exhausted. "Tomorrow," she said softly, as if convincing herself. "Tomorrow we'll fix it." He didn't respond. Outside, the lights of the city flickered like camera flashes in the distance. Bright, relentless, and unyielding. And in that vast city where millions moved unseen, two people sat trapped in the small, invisible cage of their own making, built not by malice, but by the unending need to be noticed. By dawn, the story had already outpaced the truth. Headlines were multiplying faster than Meghan's team could refresh their alerts. What had been a private dinner between three well-known figures had turned into a full-blown tabloid spectacle before most of Manhattan had even woken up. The digital world had devoured it, twisted it, and spat it back out as a feeding frenzy. At exactly 6 a.m., Page 6 published the first piece. Ed Sheeran leaves Meghan Markle's flowers behind after awkward NYC dinner. The subheading read, "Exclusive. Royal couples evening with pop star ends with visible tension." It was only a few paragraphs long, vague on details but rich in insinuation. That was all it took. Within minutes, gossip blogs, Twitter threads, and TikTok commentators picked it up, amplifying every rumor, every alleged eyewitness account. Meghan woke to the buzz of her phone vibrating incessantly on the nightstand. She groaned, shielding her eyes from the early sunlight filtering through the curtains. Harry was still half asleep beside her, but even he stirred at the constant noise. "What time is it?" he murmured. "Too early for this," she muttered. grabbing the phone. She scrolled through the notifications. Her publicist, her assistant, and multiple missed calls from a Los Angeles number she recognized instantly. She sighed. It started. Harry blinked, confused. Started what? She turned the screen toward him. He squinted, reading the headline. His face tensed. Oh, bloody hell. The morning unfolded like a carefully timed avalanche. By 8 a.m., the story was everywhere. Entertainment Tonight ran footage of Meghan and Harry leaving the restaurant, intercut with stock clips of Ed Sheeran smiling at a separate event earlier that week. Commentators speculated on everything. Their body language, Meghan's expression, the meaning behind the flowers. CNN's entertainment segment even featured a behavioral expert analyzing the footage frame by frame. There's tension in the Duchess's posture, she explained earnestly. She's performing calmness, not feeling it. By 9 o'clock, #Flowergate was trending. Thousands of memes flooded social media. One showed a bouquet tossed in a trash bin with the caption, "When you're all out of PR magic." Another, more brutal one, displayed a split photo. On one side, Meghan smiling in front of paparazzi. On the other, Ed Sheeran performing at a concert. The caption read, "One seeks attention, the other seeks meaning." Harry scrolled through Twitter in silence, each post another jab. Meghan, meanwhile, was on her third cup of coffee, pacing the hotel suite as her team tried to manage the fallout. "We can get ahead of it," her publicist said through the speakerphone. "We release a follow-up, make it about charity, deflect the focus from the photo." "Charity?" Meghan asked sharply. "The story isn't about charity. It's about him rejecting me." "Exactly," the voice replied. "Which means we redirect. We make it about something bigger. People move on faster when the conversation feels noble." Harry stood and ran a hand through his hair. "Or we could just not say anything." Meghan turned to him. "So we let them mock me?" He met her stare calmly. "They'll move on faster if you don't feed it." Her voice softened, but her tone was heavy with frustration. "You don't understand. They never move on from me." That he couldn't argue with. By mid-morning, British outlets had picked up the story. The Daily Mail ran a sensationalized version. Meghan Markle's New York dinner disaster. Pop star Ed Sheeran storms out after awkward photo request. The accompanying article was padded with unnamed sources. One insider claimed Ed was put off by Meghan's constant self-promotion, while another suggested Harry looked embarrassed during the exchange. There was no evidence for any of it, but none was needed. The narrative had already taken shape. Across the Atlantic, talk shows jumped in. On Good Morning Britain, a commentator smirked as he discussed the story. "It's classic Meghan," he said, "always trying to make every encounter into a headline. I can't say I blame Ed for walking away." The clip went viral, fueling even more debate online. Meanwhile, Ed Sheeran's silence was becoming a story in itself. Fans praised him for his restraint. "This is why people respect Ed," one user wrote. "He doesn't play into the circus." Another tweeted, "Ed Sheeran handled it with quiet dignity. Meghan should take notes." By lunchtime, the memes had evolved into parody videos. TikToks reenacting the dinner, YouTubers breaking down the drama, and even comedians adding punchlines to the saga. One sketch showed an actor dressed as Ed tossing a bouquet into a bin while saying, "No photo, no PR, no problem." It was cruel, but it spread like wildfire. Inside the hotel, Meghan's phone buzzed again. Her mother, Doria, had sent a message. "Ignore them, sweetheart." It read, "This will blow over." Meghan stared at it for a long time before setting the phone down. She didn't reply. Her PR advisor called again. "We can still change the tone," she said. "If you give a short statement or a friendly quote to a trusted outlet, we can reframe it. Something like, 'We had a wonderful time and look forward to future collaboration.' It makes you sound gracious." Meghan hesitated. "And if he never says anything? Then your version becomes the only version," the advisor replied. "That's how narrative control works." Harry's voice came from the corner. "Or you could just let it die." She turned sharply toward him. You think this doesn't affect you? Every time something like this happens, it's your family that uses it against me. He sighed, running a hand across his face. It's not about me or them. It's about letting go. You don't have to fight every story. Her response came quick, defensive. If I don't, who will? There it was again. The unspoken battle that had haunted their marriage since they left the royal fold. Meghan fought for control. Harry fought for peace. The media, as always, thrived on the war between them. By evening, the dinner had become more than gossip. It had turned into an allegory for Meghan's entire public life, a symbol of perception versus reality. Commentators on YouTube dissected it as the perfect metaphor for why Meghan's PR keeps failing. A viral thread laid it out bluntly. She tries too hard to seem relatable, and people can smell performance a mile away. Yet for all the noise, not a single quote came from Ed Sheeran. No Instagram post, no denial, no acknowledgement. Just silence. And that silence spoke louder than any statement Meghan's team could have crafted. As night fell over the city again, Meghan sat by the window, staring down at the lights. They're painting me like I'm desperate, she said softly. Like I can't exist without validation. Harry sat nearby, quiet for a moment. Then he said, maybe the problem isn't what they say. It's that you keep trying to prove them wrong instead of proving yourself right. She looked at him, but he didn't meet her eyes. His gaze was on the skyline, on the distance. Somewhere out there, Ed Sheeran was probably back in his studio, his world untouched by the chaos. The dinner was already behind him. For him, it had been a brief evening, a moment of awkwardness he'd likely forget. For Meghan, it had become a mirror she couldn't look away from, a reflection of how fragile her image had become. The next morning, another headline hit. Ed Sheeran breaks his silence. Sort of. It wasn't really a statement, just a passing comment captured by a reporter outside his hotel. It was nice catching up, he'd said. They're lovely people. Nothing more, nothing less. But the internet didn't care about neutrality. They cared about symbols, and by then the story had already chosen its symbol. A discarded bouquet on a cold Manhattan street. By the time Meghan's team entered full crisis mode, the damage had calcified into something far beyond repair. What began as gossip had become a defining narrative, a global conversation not about what happened, but about what it symbolized. To the public, the dinner represented the latest chapter in a long-running pattern. Meghan Markle chasing visibility and being met with quiet rejection. Inside her hotel suite, that perception was unacceptable. She could not let another headline define her. It was barely 9:30 a.m. when her team assembled in the suite's private lounge. The table was covered with open laptops, stacks of press